Welcome to Sounding Board, a podcast from the Presbyterian Association of Musicians.
Faith expressed, music explored, stories shared. This is a podcast that we hope will inspire and equip worshiping communities through meaningful conversations at the intersection of music, faith, and liturgy. Today's episode, we had Dr. Arreon Harley Emerson, and man, what an accomplished, busy guy he
Seriously.
is.
But just delightful.
Yeah.
Like, just a warm individual to talk to. Really.
A real joy for us to get to speak to him today. Dr. Harley Emerson he kind of has a hand in many things, but as he talks about, has a hand in many things that sort of have the same core value, which is including people, creating equity, creating inclusion and diversity. And I think there's a lot for us to learn as people of faith, people who are in the church, but I think also people that are educators could certainly benefit from this talk today.
Yeah. It made me think of that. What's the phrase? Like, where you're called to is where your greatest passion collides with the needs of the world or something. It made me, just the way he described how organically things just sort of
fell into place in his calling.
It was just those things were colliding, needs of the world and his passions, and
that's right.
He just followed it.
That's right. Yeah, it's a good lesson for us to, when you see a void, that you can fill it, and sometimes that's maybe the Spirit is calling you to fill that void. Yeah.
And you just have to trust where the Spirit is leading you.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, enjoy today's episode with Dr. Arreon Harley Emerson.
Looking to stretch your creativity in worship and the arts?
PAM's Worship and Music Conference offers classes in music, Bible, liturgy, drumming, art, photography, and more.
Whether you sing, ring, play, preach, or create, there's space for your gifts to grow.
Join us at Montreat, North Carolina, June 21st through the 26th, or June 28th through July 3rd.
Learn more at presbymusic.org/conference and discover what's possible. Today, our guest is Dr. Arreon Harley Emerson. He is a conductor, composer, nonprofit strategist, and equity coach, currently serving as assistant professor of choral music at Penn State University, where he directs Essence of Joy, a choir dedicated to the music of the Black diaspora. He is also the president and CEO of Equity Sings and the artistic director of Elevate Vocal Arts, an organization committed to advancing creative workforce development for vocal artists across backgrounds and traditions. Dr. Harley Emerson holds a PhD in music education from Temple University's Boyer College of Music and Dance, where he also earned a graduate certificate in diversity in higher education. He previously earned dual bachelor's degrees in music theory and composition and vocal performance from Goucher College and master's degrees in choral conducting and vocal performance from the University of Delaware.
A passionate arts leader, he has conducted in prestigious venues such as St. Peter's Basilica, the Kimmel Center, and the Meyerhoff Symphony Hall. His research has been featured in the Oxford Handbook for Choral Pedagogy, and his TEDx talk, The Gang Mentality of Choirs, explores music's transformative power. He is the founder of Bent But Not Broken, a conference celebrating Black choral excellence, and serves as national chair of the American Choral Directors Association's Diversity Initiatives Committee. Welcome, Dr. Harley Emerson. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. And Arreon is totally just fine.
All right, Arreon. So this is a podcast for the Presbyterian Association of Musicians. And many of our listeners, we're hoping, will be musicians and non-musicians, pastors, non-pastors, church people, non-church people. But we always like to ask our guests, what was your upbringing like? What was your early relationship with the church, if any? Did you grow up singing in church choir? And what were some of those early experiences like for you?
Yeah, so I started attending church in the womb. I come from, a family that, went to church regularly. And so I grew up in a Black non-denominational church, started singing in that very early. And it was like a great experience. My church experience and faith journey are inseparable with my music journey. They are like one and the same, because of just how closely linked that they have been.
Mm-hmm. I think that's true for so many people that I'm trying to think of outside of the church. Of course you can take lessons, but so many of us started playing and singing regularly and having this really warm and loving environment where we could try and we could just sort of try out different hats of who we are musically. And the church is just such a great place to start experimenting musically. And I love to hear that you started in the womb.
Yeah, that's when I started going, quite literally, whether it was my choice or not, that's when we started going, and then when I came out every Sunday. So there you go.
Nice.
I will say this, we say that we went to church from Sunday to Sunday because, in Black church, there is something every day. It was like Sunday services, and then Monday there was something, and Tuesday may have been youth group, and Wednesday was Bible study, and Thursday was choir rehearsal, and Friday was whatever, and Saturday was prayer breakfast. And so we always, talked about going to church from Sunday to Sunday.
Yeah.
Nice.
So I didn't grow up in the Black church, but I did grow up Southern Baptist, and so I can relate a little bit with that feeling of there's always something going on at the church, and we're there all the time. And my husband, who grew up Catholic, couldn't believe when I said, yeah, we went to church Sunday morning and Sunday afternoon. We went home and ate lunch and took a nap, and we're back at church again in the evening.
Nice. I love it. So you lead the organization Equity Sings. For our listeners who don't know, can you tell us a little bit about the vision for the organization, and how that arose and what you all do?
Yeah, so the origin story of Equity Sings is really that I'd always been very interested in inclusion work. It has just always been a big part of who I am as a person. And I always had a value of diverse musicking experiences, particularly. And I grew up both, with this rich Black church experience, and then also with a really rich children's choir experience at Peabody Conservatory Group in Baltimore, Maryland. And it was just so rich and so wonderful. And I just wanted people to kind of realize that they didn't have to choose, like any particular kind of music, that they could all live really like harmoniously. That really was how Equity Sings got started. And it was trying to help people first on an artistic journey of how do they discover diverse repertoire? How do you be inclusive? What does it mean to be an inclusive conductor? Because I have a long history in nonprofits, a lot of people are wanting to do this work, but this work ain't free, right? So I would begin to share like my experiences with fundraising, and that's a big experience and expertise of mine. And so really how Equity Sings began to evolve over the years was that we were helping organizations who wanted to be inclusive organizations do so. So how do we do it, and how do we fund it? And that's essentially the lane that we're in. So it's pretty niche and pretty specific in some ways. We started off with pretty much exclusively choirs, then music organizations, then arts organizations in general, and now it's a pretty diverse portfolio of various different things. Unfortunately, with so much going on, like there aren't a lot of openings. So if anyone's like, "Oh, I'm going to call them," like we're pretty booked up at the moment. That's kind of the origin story. And the mission is to make sure that every organization that has this vision of being inclusive knows how to live that and knows how to fund that.
Yeah, I think that's so important. There's so many ways of being inclusive, and I think sometimes people and organizations can say or think, "Oh, well, we're definitely inclusive. We have a rainbow flag on this
Exactly.
emblem, and so of course we're done. We checked that box." And there's so many ways to be inclusive, and I think so many people, organizations, companies have blind spots in what exactly that means. And when you say you're inclusive, are you really being inclusive to all people? I'm so wonderful that you all help people achieve that.
Yeah, it is. And inclusion is so complex
Right.
in many ways. And it's also paradoxical because, like, inclusion also means making the commitment to never also allow certain thoughts and ideologies and ways of being and knowing happen. So like that's why inclusion is so complex. And this guy named Popper, he has this, we know it as Popper's paradox after World War II. People are like, yeah, you have to be inclusive and you have to be tolerant until someone comes along who is oppressing others. And then you can't be tolerant of that, right? There are limits to that tolerance and to that inclusion when it comes to those kinds of situations where we can't be tolerant and inclusive of these thoughts and ideologies that are taking away the basic agency of others and that are oppressing others. That's when we find the edge of inclusion. And so it's really fascinating work and helping people to find that edge. Like we want to be inclusive to all these sorts of things, but where is that line for us where we're like, we can't we as an organization, we as a choir, we as an orchestra, we as a company, like we're going to be inclusive. And yes, we want to have folks who are from this community and that community. But when folks have thoughts that are about oppressing others, at what point do we say that that's not welcome here? You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and so it's complex.
I'm wondering, I'm thinking that probably in this work too, one of the challenges is like for an organization is you don't know what you don't know. So as organizations are searching for that line, do you find that is that a challenging thing to help them identify, or does it sort of readily pop out to people and they're like, oh yeah, this is obviously our line? Or what does that look like?
Yeah, people don't know the line usually until there's a crisis that comes up, and they're like, "Oh my God, what are we supposed to do?"
Yeah.
And and that's normal, right? I try to tell folks like who are in that space, like we often don't touch the stove until we're curious. And once we touch that stove, we know not to do it again, right? And then we also know that you don't have to go around touching every stove to know that every stove is hot, right? So we generally, it's experiential in the life of an organization. But you can also prepare for that by having conversations about deep and permeating conversations, not surface level, but deep and permeating conversations about what our values are and asking us ourselves, like, what is it that we believe? What do we know to be true? What do we know to be right? And what do we know to be just? And understanding that those are different questions. So I think once you can begin to answer those, and I say begin to answer those because we are always going to be answering them. That's part of the journey. Inclusion is a spiral. It's not a destination. We just go to a deeper level of depth in our time. So, but once we begin to answer those questions, we begin to get maybe a little bit lower on that spiral and on that continuum of work that's continuous.
It's important work. We definitely have some more questions. We want to delve into that, but before we do, can you also just share with us a little bit about Elevate Vocal Arts and what the vision is there and what you're doing with that?
Yeah, so I was telling you a little bit about how Equity Sings got started, and I had this great Black church experience and musicking experience, and I had this great children's choir experience. But they were totally different racial makeups. One was all Black, one was majority. I want not 100%, but predominantly very, 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 very white. And as I began to like go through school and musicking experiences, I began to see fewer and fewer people of color. And at one day I thought, well, how many teachers growing up in Baltimore, Maryland, right? How many teachers did I have, music teachers that I have that were Black? And I will tell you, the first Black music teacher that I had was doing a doctoral degree. My first music teacher of color was a Latina woman when I was doing my master's degree. And when I went back, because I never really thought about it, because I never thought of myself as hungry for that. Because sometimes you can be malnourished and unaware of that malnourishment.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't until I began to reflect that I began to say, oh my gosh, we need to do something fundamentally different in the vocal arts ecosystem. And so what I felt like we might be able to do with our organization and my colleagues, what we seek to do is to take a look specifically at the vocal arts ecosystem, choirs, and begin to expand that. And how do we create more opportunities for vocal artists of color, future and aspiring music educators of color, trans, those who are from low income and might not have opportunities to have private lessons? How do we begin to reach out to those who are on the margins and to radically diversify this ecosystem? So that's the kind of work that we're in, is really emancipating what we even think it is, which is why we also don't say, choral. We don't use that term, even though we do have a choral ensemble, because like not all great singing is choral music.
Sure.
Some of it could be different. It might not all be opera. It could be hip hop, jazz, R&B. It could be spoken word. It could be anything that's artistic that we're doing with our voice. And so that's what our mission is to dramatically diversify that ecosystem, and that we want to also be able to show those who are in schools that there are these pathways and career pathways, and you can be a music teacher, or you can be a professional vocal artist, or you can be a composer of vocal music. And so that's what we do. And we also have a flagship ensemble called Elevation. It's an all-professional ensemble of folks from every kind of walk of life that you could imagine, racially, gender-wise, gender expansive and gender affirming ensemble. We have just all kinds of diversities, both the kind that you can see and the kinds that you can't see. And everyone is working together in this ensemble, and we're doing a broad and diverse set of repertoire. So we might do a Bach motet and then do a Beyonce tune back to back,
Yes.
because that's the fullness of the gift of music that we should all gratefully receive into our hearts.
That's so cool. I love it.
I'm so impressed by you. As we started with a gigantic list of names of people that we wanted to talk with, and your name kept coming up because of all these things that you're doing. And I'm just curious. This is sort of a weird question, but you seem like a young guy who has already accomplished so much in your career, and you started these organizations. You're president and CEO of organizations. You started a conference, the Bent But Not Broken Conference, and that I think is under the branch of Elevate. Is that right? Under the umbrella, and it's in its third year, I think, if I'm remembering that correctly. This is sort of a weird question, but how did you, I guess, have the confidence to know how to even start all of this? That's sort of a weird question to say, but I would never I would never dream that I could accomplish as much as you have dreamed and accomplished.
Um, well, that's a good question, and I've gotten a lot of similar questions. And first, I'll say that like I definitely I'm knocking on 40's door. So I'll always say I look young, and it's like one of like the things that we always say is black don't crack. So it's so great. It's so great to look young forever or for a long time. But I do feel very fortunate to have been able to serve in a variety of capacities and do a lot of different things. And there is not even a confidence, but just um, a stubbornness, a cheerful insistence that it can and should be and ought to be better. And so, with all these different things, it's like sometimes people ask me, how do you juggle all the things? And it's not about juggling different things for me because there's still one core mission. Even though there are these different things that are happening at different places, it is like, how are we fundamentally becoming more equitable and more just? And that's what I like to say is the reference point. That's the mission for all of these different things. And I like to think about it as having coordinates in a GPS. You have to have a destination to go to, and you might be able to go this way or around or be detoured because of these things that are happening. But at the end of the day, it's about having a focus on this destination and being stubborn and cheerfully insistent about the multiple ways that it's possible to reach that destination.
That's such a perfect answer. It makes me think of that you have the trunk of the tree is the same and the roots are the same, but you have these different branches that are going out in different directions with your different organizations and conferences that you put together on top of being a full-time faculty member at a prestigious university. That's so impressive. Talk to us about Bent But Not Broken. Where did you see a void in the conference space, the choral space that you felt needed to be filled? Was it a group of people that decided to do this? How did that come about?
Yeah, so yes, and how it really began. Two of my good friends and colleagues, so Dr. Eugene Rogers, Michigan State University, Dr. Jason Max Ferdinand of the Jason Max Ferdinand Singers, now at University of Maryland. He was at Oakwood University at this
Right.
point, conducting the Aeolians, which,
Right.
these are like
Say no more.
the giants, right? And I was like trying to get them to work with my choir. And I was just like, oh, maybe you could come and work with my choir. And I was like, Eugene, you should bring your choir. And I want them to see what you're doing. And Jason, maybe you can conduct my choir. And it was just something to serve like the needs of the students. And then it was like, oh, well, so-and-so heard that we were doing this and they want to bring their choir. And then so-and-so offered a presentation and blah, 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 blah. And what ended up being like a small program, kind of like a little festival kind of thing for my students, just naturally and organically grew into something larger. And so that is really the origin story of how it got started. Yes, I didn't even, again, to this point of almost like when I looked back at my experience and realized I didn't have Black music teachers, right? Until so late in life, I didn't realize that I was malnourished in some of these spaces that were, whether they were like professional music organizations or, maybe pastoral music organizations that are offering things as well. I didn't realize that it was happening until all these other people were like, I want to be there and I want to learn too. And I was like, oh, okay. And that's really how it got started. And every year it's just continued to grow. And become a bit more complex in a really kind of beautiful and elegant way.
It sounds like you are not alone in that feeling, that appetite for that that experience, and to be surrounded by such excellence and such great examples. And I'm just thinking about just what a gift you're giving to your students and to young choral musicians who are looking for examples that of people who look like them. And
Yeah.
that's such a wonderful thing. Just one more question about the conference. So who can attend this conference, and how can they learn more?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you go to elevatevocalarts.org, we have a page that's always devoted to Bent But Not Broken. The next one is about to be announced very, very soon.
Yes.
It will be announced in coordination with another conference, our big kind of like parent conference, if you will, the American Choral Directors Association. So, but just prior to that, we will announce the 2026 conference and the dates and all that. So it's happening in November of 2026. So people should be on the lookout, and they'll be able to learn more information about what's happening and what they should be getting excited about. So that's what's coming up. Coming up for Bent But Not Broken. You can find information on our website. And you can also follow on social media at Elevate Vocal Arts. And we also have a separate conference handle as well. We kind of will cross post, but at BBNB for Bent But Not Broken Conference on Instagram. And so we do like we'll do a little feature over the months of all the groups and all of the cool people, and anyone can attend.
Wonderful.
Anyone can attend. You do not have to be a Black choral musician. You do not need to be a musician at all. Anyone can come. It is a welcoming and inclusive space for all peoples of all walks of life who are looking to engage in this incredible body of music.
Amazing.
Great.
That's
Thank
great.
you.
That's great. So thinking about your work as a choral conductor, you've also given a TED Talk. We can plug that to our listeners. Check out your TED Talk. You can find it on YouTube. We did. In your TED Talk, you talk about the way that part of your work when you lead choirs is not just to teach music, but to fulfill real needs that singers come in the door with. Can you talk about the importance of this and why it's so key to what we all do as choral directors?
Yeah, it's absolutely critical. I just one day was reading about so this TEDx talk is called the gang mentality of choirs, and I was like reading some research for another project that I was working on, completely unrelated, and I saw in the corner some information about like gang mentality, and I was like, what's gang mentality? And it was like this mentality that gangs have, and they went through all kinds of gangs, like that you could imagine, from positive gangs to negative gangs to football teams to like the old school kind of mafia movies, and all those sorts of things. And they were saying, but there is this mentality that in this group, in this community, we can find and have our needs met, and that in these spaces, why people were part of these spaces was essentially because of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that we move from like our basic needs, food, shelter, clothing, all the way up to self-actualization at the top of that pyramid. And when I read that, I was like, oh, that is so true, that is why people would join a group like that. And I started thinking about choirs, and I was like, the most successful choirs, are the ones that have this sense of community, ones that are meeting needs of folks. And I love particularly ensembles that are like mission and faith focused, because I think that those choirs particularly do it well. They're looking out for who's there, whose parent has just recently passed away. Can we send them a card? Who needs a ride because they have just had surgery and they can't drive, right? That's what we're talking about the bottom of the pyramid. A lot of people like to kind of think about it in these like really extreme like terms sometimes about meeting basic needs, but sometimes the basic need is a ride. Sometimes the basic need is a meal. Sometimes the basic need could be food or shelter. But we also know organizations that help people connect people to other organizations where they can find those resources. So essentially, I believe that the best choral communities, the most fulfilling choral communities, the ones that people come over and over again and can't get enough, and the ones that are never happy with their performance because they know that it can be better, that they are one and the same, and that they all have this gang mentality. So how can we use this knowledge to be more intentional about how we create choral communities? And so that's been something I've been deeply passionate about and a big research point of mine. And it intersects with inclusion, right? Because we're trying to create these welcoming spaces where everyone has the things that they need and the opportunities that they need to be successful. And how do we engineer that? Because it doesn't happen by itself. It is not magic. It may feel magical, but it is not magic. And so we have to think about the ways in which we engineer these things with intent.
Yeah, it makes me also think about how one of the points that you made in that TEDx talk was that the difference between choirs, this gang mentality in choirs, and a gang that might be more negative in nature, is that choirs sort of create this space for compassion. And can you just talk a little bit about the importance of, or talk about ways that choral music teaches us compassion and how we can impart that to our students, into our congregations, and church music? Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that is so critical. Compassion, and another word for compassion could be empathy, is another word, but like compassion, when we kind of break down the Latin roots of that word, is cum passion, right? So passion as in like passion of the Christ. So to suffer with, right? And so when we have the opportunity to engage with the stories of people who are different from us, people who have different experiences from us, which we do all the time in choral music. We're singing about stories and bringing forth stories and engaging with cultures that are different from ours, that we begin to be empathetic. We begin to feel with and to suffer along with our brothers, sisters, and siblings who are both making the art with us, and those cultures and places and traditions from where the art is derived. And so it's really, I think, you don't see it necessarily in every kind of social setting. A lot of things are just baked in, right? Because like in choir, you have to be an individual in the context of a community, right? Everybody has to sing. Otherwise, the choir doesn't sound good. But you can't sing too much because you don't want to be standing out, right? So it's like this consistent like checking, right? Like being a barometer, and like feeling with sensitivity what is like happening, in awareness, what is going on. And I feel like that compassion, that empathy, it is a muscle. And a muscle that is not exercised, we know that there will be atrophy. And so choir is a place that is a little gym where we get to exercise that muscle with intention. And so that's why I love it, because so much of it is just baked in. If we are going to do it well, then so much of it is already kind of baked in. The teamwork, the cooperation, the unpacking of the text, the understanding of someone's story, someone's context, the working together for the common good, the emotional connection to music, to text, to one another, the awareness of what is happening around us. Because, hey, just because I'm the soprano doesn't mean I have the melody right now, right? Becoming
Wait a minute, hold
aware
on.
of what, I know, hot take, right?
Hot take from Arreon.
It's so baked into what we do, and so it helps us to be able to flex this muscle of compassion and of empathy.
I love that. In a way, it seems so simple and obvious to be flexing that muscle, but yet it seems like such an important need and shift that a few years ago I read a book called The Conductor as Leader by Ramona Wiss, and she talks about this need that she saw, at least in the conducting world, that for so long we had this dictatorial kind of figure that was at the front, and compassion certainly wasn't what you were going to get from this person, and they were going to tell you how it needed to be, and if you were wrong they were going to come down on you. And she was saying that's not actually good leadership, and that actually we can't make good music from that. I mean, I'm sure someone could say, well, there's these recordings that are
Sure.
pristine or whatever, but really, to make good music, we have to offer all of ourselves in a vulnerable way, and we can't do that in a place of fear. And so this compassion that you're talking about, I think, speaks to that. It allows us to make music in a freer space.
Yeah, and that compassion that you speak about, it feels so countercultural, right? It's so choral spaces, and for us who are working in churches, we really have to protect that space, because out there, you're not going to find that same kind of love and compassion and understanding and seeking to understand each other. So I just wish everyone sang in choir. I think we would all become more compassionate, loving human beings.
I totally agree. And beyond that, when we sing, there's something special about choral music, right? That differentiates it from instrument music, which is that we have text. And that every time we get to rehearse something, that text sets in a little deeper. And so the idea that we are grappling with these things and allowing these things to germinate, because a lot of people think that, like, oh, like these messages, or particularly music that's like sacred music, or music that's social justice music, that it's like we have to like beat them over the head with what the text is, and like then they'll be saved, or then they'll understand social justice and all of that. And I'm like, no, like we don't have to be didactic about what it is, but we do need to allow it to germinate. And just like when you are sowing seeds, you're not just going at the ground and like digging. Oftentimes you're just like allowing the seeds to sit on the ground and to sink into that soil and to really germinate. And so I feel like music has that same thing. And whether you are singing, yes, Jesus loves me, and becoming more sure over a period of a month that is true, or whether you are singing a freedom song from the civil rights movement, that's sinking in, and that is germinating, and that we are becoming, we are beginning to understand that message. We are grappling with it both consciously and unconsciously. And so I think that's something that is particularly unique and special, that builds that empathy and builds that culture of mutual respect, that deepens faith, and that ultimately emancipates what we think the world can be, that choral music can offer to us.
Amen.
Yeah.
We could just about end it there,
yeah.
but we do have more questions. Amen.
So we'll shift gears a little bit to the really practical side of things. One of the things with this podcast, this is coming under the educational resources of the Presbyterian Association of Musicians. And so thinking about all the choral directors that may be tuning into this, can you just talk a little bit about your own preparation before you begin rehearsals with a group? What does that look like for you as a conductor as you prepare?
Yeah, that is a good question. I think the kind of preparation is different depending on what the intended goal or outcome is. But there are some basic things that I think as a conductor that I do is first and foremost I read the text. I sit there and I read the text. If it's any text, I will try to pull up the original text so that I can see how it's formatted, because a lot of times in the choral score you might not have it and it's like kind of poetic or kind of verse form, and the way that things are lined is important, and I have a whole thing about we should be thinking about that as we present choral music, but that helps to inform so much about how we might interpret that piece. So I read the text, all the text that's being said. And then the other text that I read is all the text that is on the page. So that would be any sort of text that is like accelerando, morendo, because a lot of times it's just like, oh, you get to that cadential point and you see retardando and you're like, okay, I'm going to slow down. But sometimes I have found things in the score that I have never realized from just simply reading the words on the page. Like, oh, I never realized that was supposed to be a decrescendo. I've been crescendoing here all the time. Oh, I never realized that it said with spirit. And what does that mean? And so that's where I start. And from there, I then, of course, sit down and start learning it. My process is I always audiate a score before I go to the keyboard and the piano and start playing it out. I want to be able to hear everything. I try not to listen to if I'm going to be conducting the piece, I try not to just go and listen to someone else's recording until I've done a bit of score study on the piece. So I sit there, I audiate it, I go to the piano, feel what that feels like, and then kind of start marking the score and like, what is happening? Like, why is this happening? Like, why did Stanford decide to use this common tone modulation here? Like, wow, there's a chromatic mediant happening right now. How does that support the text? And I am not a believer that every single composer does that with intent. As a composer myself, sometimes I have done some things like that and it has not been like, oh my goodness, I am going to use a secondary dominant right now. But there is something about the text that calls for it. So analyzing a score and understanding its harmonic language is another way for us to go deeper into the text, because there are word decisions, conscious and unconscious, that we should be aware of. So that's kind of my first kind of step in it. And then the other thing I try to do on a parallel track is understand the sociocultural elements of the piece. Where did it come from? Why would the piece be written? Who were those original composers or co-creators of the piece? Was there a specific ceremony? Is it some sort of cultural practice, ritual, tradition? And I do that on a parallel track and try to learn and understand as much as I can. And then when it comes to that, generally you have more questions. So you then start looking for people who can help answer those questions, or you start researching those questions. And so that's kind of my process. And then I go into the rehearsal, and I always, I try to read through a piece all the way through the first time. Like, let's just hear it, because I think there's so much you can learn from just walking through the piece. Sometimes I think we can chunk things down too small, which can also be problematic. But in that initial read through, what I am listening for are what are the things that are innately natural to that ensemble to do. Because I think that's the difference between like a great conductor and an excellent conductor. An excellent conductor is not only going to foist their interpretation onto an ensemble, but they're going to be a conductor, a conduit of thoughts and ideas, and create this exchange and be like, guess what? I hear this thing happening. How can we pull that out and tease that out a little bit more, so that even though we're not talking about it, we are in fact exchanging musical ideas and having this dialogue. So that's why I find it really important to be able to, at least to be able to like give people some space to be able to just read through something without being like, oh, stop, let's get it right. Like, duh, it's not going to, they don't know.
Sure.
Reading through it, but there are going to be elements of it that are just going to feel organic to them, and to that instrument. And a choir is like an organ. It's going to speak differently in every space. Every organ is a little bit different, right? And the same is true, of choirs. There are no two choirs that are the same, because there are no two choirs that have the exact same human beings, and there are no two human beings that are the same. So making sure that we're really, truly listening to what is already there, because sometimes I think that we can strip away musicality when we start to woodshed right off the bat. And so that's what I feel is part of my preparation, because as I hear those things, I want to take note of those things so that they can be incorporated into a richer interpretation.
I love that. I love that idea of being a conduit, like you said, and that we're kind of feeding off of each other in this process of music making. And that's such a beautiful way of approaching it. I really love it. I in my current context, we've got a lot of professionals in our church choir and a lot of folks with DMAs and their vocal performance. And when I first got there, felt really intimidated by this. And I was talking to a woman who teaches voice at a university and has a DMA, and I was saying this to her, and she said, "No, Jeremy, you don't have to feel this pressure. That like you're going to bring something to this music that I wouldn't have thought of, but I'll bring something, and we're going to create this together." And that just like felt like scales fell from my eyes, like, oh my gosh. But I love that image that you had of the conduit. That's so great.
Yeah. Absolutely.
This is so great. I want to go back a little bit and kind of circle back to talking about something you said earlier about choral singing and compassion and suffering with one another. It makes me think about in church music, and I guess all music in general, choral music, when we sing the experiences of other people, it gives us insight to them. It humanizes them. Maybe even sometimes people that we think of as enemies. When we sing music from their tradition, sometimes there's so much for us to learn there, and it's such an opportunity for us to see them as human and as our brothers, our sisters, our siblings. We're really excited that you are coming and to do some work for Pam later this month when this episode comes out in February. And your the name of the worship and music is called worship and music event is called Come Sunday, Worship and Music That Moves Us. And I'll just say a little bit about what that is, and I'd like to hear from you, because we want this is coming out. We want people to register for that and attend. And so Worship and Music That Moves Us, Come Sunday, is a 2-day gathering of worship leaders, pastors, musicians, and creatives exploring the rich worship and music traditions of the Black diaspora. As the United States marks its 250th anniversary, this event invites us to reflect on how we worship in spirit and truth, celebrating cultural gifts while reckoning with injustice. I think about there's lots of people in church music world who probably feel, I think there's probably many versions of this, but some people sing music from the Black diaspora and think nothing about it. They just sing it. And some people think so deeply about it that they're actually too scared of appropriating, of not doing it justice. And I think that's a really common fear from people who aren't Black, and that we're often are scared of appropriating. What's the appropriate way that we can respect this music and honor this music and its origins? Can you just say a little bit without giving away too much, because we still want people to register and attend, but talk a little bit about some of the things that you'll address while you're there.
Yeah, so one is the kind of tenet, what I believe is a core tenet of our faith, which is reconciliation, and a branch of reconciliation is racial reconciliation. And so racial reconciliation is a part of the work of bringing Black diaspora musics to the fore. I'm going to use musics with an S because there are so many different kinds under that broad term of Black diaspora. And I also want to just be clear that we are all appropriators. And also that appropriation is neither good nor bad. And a lot of people only know of the negative appropriation because of what they've seen online. But when we take a look at what cultural appropriation is, it's just that something has been taken out of its cultural context. That's what it means. And there is a way to appropriately appropriate. And oftentimes there are appropriations that are inappropriate that we shed light on, and we don't shed light on the ways in which we appropriately appropriate. And so I'm going to be talking about the ways in which we do that, not just in a choral setting, but also in worship settings. How do we actually appropriately appropriate? We know that we are all appropriators, right? If you wear flip-flops, you're an appropriator, right? If you use chopsticks, you're an appropriator, right? If you wear earrings, you are an appropriator. We are all appropriators. What we want to make sure that we do is that we are not one, going with reckless abandon,
Right.
and taking without ever understanding and giving. And then on the other polar, we want to ensure that we are not so aware of, like, man, this music comes from this history that's painful, that we are like, we aren't going to do it. Because that too is marginalization, right? That too is putting it on the shelf. That too is a systemic silencing, right? And so it's really important that we learn how to appropriately appropriate, and we appropriately appropriate through the process of racial reconciliation, through understanding performance practices, understanding how we should be performing something, understanding the cultural context in which something has come from. And so we'll be talking about that throughout the weekend. We'll be talking about that this music is so powerful. This music from the Black diaspora, all musics are powerful. And musics from the Black diaspora have a special place, particularly when it comes to resistance and when it comes to liberation. And we'll be talking about how this music is steeped in a tradition of Black liberation theology. Black liberation theology is this different conception of what God purpose is. And so theologians many years ago, like the Puritans who were first coming over to the United States, they were writing texts like sinners in the hands of an angry God that were like, hey, if you do this, wrath, fire, and brimstone. And yet at the same time, there was exact same time, there was enslavement that was happening. And we have folks who were singing songs like, I want Jesus to walk with me. We were singing, I want somebody's knocking at my door, right? These songs that are in contrast to this idea that the purpose of God was to judge. And this idea that the purpose of this deity is to be a consoler and to be a liberator of his people. And so we'll talk about how when we understand that, and when we understand that liberation theology, that it calls us and welcomes us to engage in racial reconciliation, to engage in doing our homework, engage in doing music, in ways that I don't like to use the term authentic, but that are culturally valid. And we'll talk about practically what does that look like? What does that look like in our liturgical sense? What does that look like when we are rehearsing a choir, or what does that look like when we are programming? And how do we respond to those incidents when we have someone in the choir or in the congregation who says, well, that's appropriation, we shouldn't be singing that song? How do you actually respond? How do you explain why we are doing this piece? A lot of times we think that we've gotten it quite right, but we may have missed a step along the way. And so we'll talk about what that full journey looks like, and give people some actual tools that they can take back to their own choirs and to their own congregations about the work of racial reconciliation and of appropriately appropriating, which is really important for us to do because we live in a global world, right? There are actually no borders in this world. And so once we understand that, it calls us to be in relationship and calls us to come into cultural humility, and to reconcile ourselves to our brothers, our sisters, our siblings, and to Christ. And so we'll talk about what that looks like.
Yeah, we have to remember that we belong to one another and that we all belong to God, and everyone is the child of God. And so you're the keynote leader of that gathering. I think there are 2 tracks to that gathering. Is that right? That there's a choral music track and then there's a worship leader track. Is worship leader in a sense of pastors and clergy people and lay people, or is that in terms of musicians who are worship leaders?
It can be both, and the choral track is really an opportunity for musicians, choral participants, choir members. It could be choir directors, choir master types, and worship leaders. That's really used in an expansive term. It could be worship pastors. It could be worship arts leaders. There are a lot of different ways in which this could look. It could look at those who are in charge of liturgy, but they might not be singers or musicians themselves. And so we'll be talking about how do we put together worship? How do we pull together Black expressions, Black idioms, both musical and non-musical, into our worship setting? So there'll be times when we're all together for both tracks. There'll be times when we're separate. When we're on the choral space, I'll be teaching music from the Black diaspora. We will be doing a lot of music, some that will be taught without a score, some that will be taught with scores, but it's a joyful opportunity. There's an opportunity to sing in this wonderful mass choir and to sing with elevation, and so I invite folks to come and to sing with that. Even if you're like, I'm not a singer, you'll be one, I promise, by the time we are done. And another thing, I will put in a little plug for this, is we will be also singing some Richard Smallwood, given that he has recently podcast. We're going to be singing just some of his music, which, was very formative in my life. I can remember my first Richard Smallwood concert going to as a kid. And so we'll be also doing some of that in Thanksgiving of all of his art that he has provided to so many churches around the globe.
Wonderful.
That's such a gift. I really want to make sure I get this word out, and I want to make sure that people know how to register for this. So again, this is it's called Come Sunday, Worship and Music. Worship and music that moves us, and it's taking place in Westchester, Pennsylvania, February 21st and 22nd. If you would like to register for that, it's not too late. You can check that out at presbymusic.com. And get registered, attend. You won't regret it. It's going to be a fabulous event.
Yeah, I can't wait. Join us. You won't regret it.
Yes.
Nice. So as we're kind of coming to a close here, I'm curious, these conversations around racial reconciliation, justice, equity, they can be hard conversations to have, both because of they can be deeply personal and sensitive, but also sometimes there are folks that don't want to have the conversations, that don't want to hear. Do you find that music and the arts provides an avenue for having these conversations that maybe wouldn't be possible otherwise?
I absolutely do, because we don't want to hear from people who we are not actively engaged with. And when we're engaged with people and we're working together or singing together or playing together, we are more able to build safe spaces and relationships where we can have these kinds of conversations. And so I think that's an important piece of it. The other thing that I do want to say is that we are living in tumultuous times. We are living in some uncertain times. And you read the news and you hear, oh, this is out and we're no longer going to do diversity and we're no longer going to do inclusion. We're all going to do that. And one of the things I say to people all the time is, when it comes to inclusion, when it comes to diversity, when it comes to justice, when it comes to equity, these are all things that we all need in order to thrive. And we have to understand that these words and these terms and these concepts are apolitical. They have been politicized, but they in and of themselves are apolitical and are absolutely necessary for us all to thrive. And so I think music is such a great place for us to remember that. I think it brings us together. I believe that the texts that we sing, they do filter, they do germinate. And so doing this musicking and doing this work and being intentional about what we're singing and how we're singing it is important. Just like it's important what we put in our body, it's important what we put in our soul, and that music is what we put in our soul. And so it's important that we are mindful of that and that we use that as a way to get closer toward a racial reconciliation.
Yeah. And as people of faith, what does the Lord require of us? To love mercy,
Right.
and to seek justice, and to walk humbly with our God.
Yeah.
You have said everything so beautifully. And speaking of ways that thinking about what you put into your own soul, we've asked all of our guests this question. We're asking everybody this question. Like you said, the world is very heavy. We're living in very tumultuous times. What are ways that you fill your soul, and what fills your soul? What are you listening to, consuming, attending, reading? How do you refresh your spirit?
Right now, I'm not really listening or attending or doing too much because I have a 4-month-old.
Oh,
Congratulations.
Who is my absolute joy and is such a reminder of God's love, grace, and mercy, and God's joy, that I have been receiving that gift, and remembering how to be joyful. Like, cause I mean, sometimes like you're like, oh my God, there's been an explosion in your neighbor. And then he's just sitting there laughing about it. And I remember to be joyful. Like, and I mean that in all sincerity. Like, it's like, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. The path to joy starts with the choice. The path to compassion starts with the choice. And so his very presence in our lives has been that reminder. And so I have been relishing that, and that has been my joy and awe. So that's what's been filling me these days.
Oh,
Nice.
amazing. So Dr. Arreon Harley Emerson, full-time faculty at Pennsylvania State University, president and CEO of Equity Sings, artistic director of Elevate Vocal Arts, conference organizer of Bent But Not Broken, and then one more full-time job of being a dad to a 4-month-old. You just gave me one more reason to find you so impressive. And thank you for spending this time with us. This was a joy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
This February, Pam's Eastern region invites you to Come Sunday, a weekend of worship and music that calls us deeper.
Come be inspired by powerful keynote speakers and worship experiences that ground us in faith and truth.
This gathering is about learning how to lead worship that honors tradition, avoids harmful appropriation, and reflects deep care for the communities we serve.
You'll gain practical tools for liturgy, writing, music leadership, and community building while connecting with others committed to justice, reconciliation, and faithful worship.
Learn from leaders including Elevate Vocal Arts, Arreon Harley Emerson, David Gambrell, and Dante Stewart.
Come Sunday takes place February 21st and 22nd, 2026, at Westminster Presbyterian Church in Westchester, Pennsylvania.
Learn more and register at presbymusic.org/regions/east-region and come be shaped for the work of worship. That conversation was such a gift. I'm so grateful for that time that we got to spend together.
Yeah, Arreon was really great to speak with. So I wanted to point out our shirts today.
Yeah,
who
tell
are we
us
representing? Oh, I'll go first. Since I knew that we were talking with Arreon, and Arreon is doing such important work in the realms of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, it reminded me that I have this T-shirt, and this T-shirt says, "God's love is fully inclusive."
Love it.
Yes.
Nice. I sort of went a similar route. You just can't tell. This is a shirt from my previous congregation where I worked, First Presbyterian Asheville. So shout out to all my Asheville, North Carolina friends.
Yes.
But it was our shirt from the Pride Festival. So on the back, you can probably see, but it's got similar to your shirt. We went that route.
Love it
today. Yeah.
Well, thanks for tuning in today. Make sure that you subscribe if you haven't already. Share with your friends, share with your family, share with your church people. Anyone who you think needs to hear more about the work that Arreon is doing. That could be people in choral spaces or teachers, really just anyone, honestly.
Yeah.
And make sure that if you haven't already, please register for Come Sunday in Westchester, Pennsylvania. It's coming up quick. We'll have a link in the show notes that you can click on and get registered, and we will see you there.